You know that, so you can leave if you don't want to be here. And that is all of the announcements that I want to make to start things out. We're going to keep questions for the end, and we're going to listen attentively. I'm looking forward to hearing about your experience with extensive reading, since I've been trying to do extensive reading with my adult learners. Take it away, Shannon.
Got you. Yes. Hello, everyone. As Jessamine said, my name is Shannon, and I have been teaching at this school for 3 years. One of the reasons that really sparked my interest in this is when I came here, I saw an extensive reading program that was, to put it bluntly, it was just completely failing. And so I came in and I saw some problems. And so I wanted to really figure out how I could address those problems in the most effective ways, which is why I have gone on this mission for the past 3 years to create a thriving extensive reading program. And I can say, honestly, I have seen such immense improvement in my students, their participation, and they're so motivated and excited to be reading in English, which as a teacher is exactly what I want. So I want to share a lot of the insights that I've had. So let me go ahead and share my PPT with you. Can everyone see this? Yes.
Beautiful.
Okay. I have my email on there as well as my website. So if you're ever interested in contacting me or seeing any of the other things that I do, then I would be happy to just talk with you and share with you. And then I also, it's on the Edzilla as well, but I just go ahead and put in the chat the handout for this session. I actually have a lot I want to talk about and not a lot of time. But the handout, I tried to make it as like a standalone, since there are so many sessions going on at this time at 12. I knew that maybe some people who would want to listen but don't have the ability to might be interested. So I created that handout. It's like 8 pages long. Please feel free to read that and look at some of the theory and reasons for what we're talking about. So first, I'm just going to go ahead and talk about motivation. There are a bunch of different definitions for motivation. You know, there's like behavioral definition, cognitive definition, constructivist definition, but the one I prefer is Robert Gardner's social psychological approach. And the reason I really like this is that it involves all aspects, which includes cognitive aspects, emotional aspects, social aspects, and effort. So motivation, put shortly, is a cognitive and emotional process that is affected by social factors leading to sustained effort. So sustained effort has to occur over a period of time. And it also means that they have a decision and a goal to reach, our students. So we want to make sure that they're working towards something, they're motivated to work towards something. So here is the 4th areas that we're going to talk about, which is based on Robert Gardner's approach. There's effort, task enjoyment, the want and will, and social factors. So first, we're going to talk about reducing the effort that our students put forth when they have to read. This is absolutely critical to the success of your program. So the first one is appropriate leveling. If your students are not reading at the correct level, you will see some of the most highly motivated students just become completely demotivated and discouraged and hate reading. I have seen this happen when I came to my program. I had seen students who they're great, you know, they get almost straight A's and everything except the reading, in which they were just failing. And the reason is they were trying to read levels that were too difficult for them. So you want to make sure that you have your students reading at the appropriate level. And we're going to talk about what the appropriate level is in 1 second. But I just want to recommend that before you do your leveling, that you have students take a level test. And the level test can really help your students to find their correct level. There are tons of level tests available online. And it depends on if you also want to use a reading program that involves an online program. At my school, we use ReadingGate. ReadingGate is phenomenal for Korean readers, just because it has so many aspects to it, and they have thousands of books for students to read that are really interesting for students of all ages, including adults.
Shannon, what is the name? What is the name of that again? I didn't hear what you said.
Reading Gate. Yes,
Gate.
here, I went ahead and wrote it in the
great.
chat. It's called readinggate.com. It is a paid program. So if you choose to do this, you would either have to have your individual students sign up, or you could have your school pay for the program. But I highly recommend Reading Gate. There are a couple of other programs. If you guys are interested, I would be happy to share those later on as well. So after students have the appropriate level, if students are still complaining that it's too hard, I want to recommend that you feel free to just lower the level for them. And the reason for this is that it can actually increase students' self-confidence, because if students have built self-confidence and like a self-confidence, like according to linguistic self-confidence theory, if students have had successful learning experiences, then they are more likely to continue and be motivated to continue on learning. And so I want to show you what is the appropriate level. This is a question that many teachers have, and it's not always easy to find. But you want your students reading with reasonable comfort. This shouldn't be like a sweating and difficult and really focused activity. It should be reasonably and comfortable for them. And then you also don't want your readers to continuously have to stop. They continuously have to stop, look up words. If they're asking so many questions that they can't understand, then that's not the appropriate level. And then you don't want them to be fatigued or overwhelmed. After the test, they shouldn't be exhausted. Instead, they should be, wow, okay, that was fun and enjoyable. So I'm just going to go ahead and show, according to Brave, Brave has an excellent book called Reading in a Second Language. And these are a lot of insights into extensive reading programs. Highly recommend that resource. He recommends that for independent reading texts, that 98 to 99% of the words should be familiar to students. Of course, this can be less with familiar background knowledge. So students really know about a topic. Usually they can read at a higher level than they would normally be reading. However, that's always based on the topic of what the students are reading. If you want your students reading at a little bit of a different level with words that are harder, one of the strategies that you can use is glossed texts or books, and also have students use dictionaries. So I run a hybrid reading program. So that means it's online and we have paper books for our students. So they can choose which one to use. In Reading Gate and many other online reading programs, simply students can just hover their mouse over the word and the Korean meaning will actually show right there. And that's just reduces that effort that students have to put forth, because it's so much easier for them when they have this unknown word that comes up. And also dictionaries. Of course, paper dictionaries these days, not many students are inclined to use them. But one strategy you can have is have students use an online dictionary on a tablet while reading a paper book, or on their phone while reading their paper book. So if they ever come across a word that they don't know, then they can easily just look it up. This reduces that effort because they're not sitting there thinking, what does this word mean? Well, can I figure it out? And it also reduces the amount of questions that they will ask to you as their teacher. So appropriate leveling leads to an increase in student self-confidence. They have successful learning experiences. And interestingly, this has shown to increase students' motivation. Some studies have shown this, especially Dornier's study back in 2014. There's more information about that study in the handout. So it's really interesting that just having the right level for your student can actually lead to increased motivation. And then something I want to say is if you do reduce your students' levels and you're thinking, wow, I want my students to get to a higher level, you can always have your students graduate from one level to the next. I actually like to give my students little certificates, with a little gold seal on it that says they've graduated from one level to the next. And we have a little ceremony where the students are all clapping and very excited for the other students who are able to move up in their reading levels. You can do this if they read a certain number of books or pages, however you want, but this will just ensure that they are improving their level over time. And then the second thing I want to talk about is provision of reading time. Normally, most schools do not provide time for students to actually do extensive reading in the classroom. To me, I think this is really sad. And one of the reasons is that reading time has been very strongly linked to academic success across the board. When students spend more time reading, they are usually in the higher percentile of higher achieving students and in test scores. And so actually, you can see here the 60th percentile, if they're just reading 6.5 minutes per day, then most students will be in the 60th percentile. Interestingly enough, most schools in Korea, our middle school class time is about 45 minutes. So if you give one 45-minute session to students where they're reading, then that equals to about 6.5 minutes per day, just one session a week. And of course, when students start reading in the classroom, they're more likely to read outside of the classroom as well, which will hopefully increase their reading time. But I just want to encourage you to consider providing time for your students to actually read during the class. Okay. Second, we're going to talk about task enjoyment. So we're going to talk about the importance of the resources and the actual text that your students are reading, and student choice and autonomy, the classroom environment, and breaking up monotony, the monotony of learning. So resources, of course, are vital because it really depends on what your students are reading. You want to have as wide a range of texts as possible. Of course, the most common for ELLs is graded readers, and graded readers are a phenomenal resource for students because they're already leveled according to every graded reader has a different leveling system, but they're already leveled so that students can easily find the correct book at the right level. But of course, I want to encourage you to include things like comic books, newspaper articles, online blogs, even Facebook posts, these kind of things. Students will love reading these. And students all have really diverse interests. I had one student who, he told me once in class that he loves Ariana Grande. And he was not a fan of our reading program, to say the least. But I went online and I found this article about Ariana Grande. It just took me about 5 minutes to find this article. And then I quickly just took out some difficult words and switched them with some easier ones. And then I gave it to him to read during the class the next week. And he was actually shocked. He was like, wow, teacher, you remember I like Ariana Grande? And I was like, yes, I do remember. And I wanted to share this with you so you can learn more about her. And actually, after that, that student was so much more interested in reading just because he realized he could read a variety of texts about things that he actually wanted to read. So just providing variety to your students is super important. And then relevance, of course. A lot of times I've seen in reading programs that I visited at other schools is that students would be reading books that were made for native speaker children. While these books can be a great resource, and sometimes students will love those, depending on the age of your students, it can often feel a little bit patronizing or immature, depending on the content of the books. So you want to make sure that you have books that are actually relevant to your students' age, stage of life, and interests. So one thing that my students love is Disney books. Anything Disney, they are all over that. Even high school students, they still love Disney. I'm an adult, I still love Disney. So you want to find those little topics that your students really are interested in, and then invest in resources that are related to that and relevant to them. And then I want to talk about organization. If your books are not organized well, students cannot find the correct books that they need to be reading. So of course, organizing by level is key. Level is the most important. It should be the first thing that you organize. Then within the level, if you happen to have a lot of resources, you could organize by genre, like having mystery books, nonfiction, etc., all separated. Or you can also organize by color, which my students are middle and high school, not elementary, but they still love having these books separated by color. It also makes it really easy for them to put the books back in the correct spot because they can find the correct section to do it in. So there's a lot of options, but first and foremost, please organize your books by level so that students can find the correct books to read. Then I want to talk about availability. One of the issues with like having bookshelves like this, you cannot actually see the cover of a book. And sometimes even the spine of the book does not include the title of the book. So one way to counteract this is to have some books on display, like right here. You can see I have some recommended books for students, such as the Goosebumps books. I've got some Disney books here, and I've got some harder text for my high school students, such as Hunger Games and Twilight. And these kind of books that when students come to my class and they say, teacher, I don't know what to read. Well, here are all of the recommended books that we have, and they can easily see the cover, it can grab their attention, and they're able to get that book easily and just start reading. And then let's talk about student choice and autonomy. Oftentimes in the reading classroom, I've seen teachers require a certain book, all students have to read, whatever. I want to discourage you from doing this in the extensive reading programs. For intensive reading lessons, that's totally appropriate. But for extensive reading, we want it to be enjoyable. And of course, I have a quote here from Brown: motivation is highest when one can make one's own choices, whether they're in short-term or long-term contexts. And this is simply true. If students are making their own choices, they're going to be much more invested in your program. So the first thing, of course, is letting students choose the things that they read. The second thing would be letting students set their own personal goals. As a teacher, it's easy to say, you should read, dun, 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 dun. But let them choose what they want their goal to be. They're more likely to achieve that goal if they set it themselves rather than you telling them what their goal is. Okay, and the next thing is having students choose where to sit, if behavior allows, of course. And sometimes you can even reward the behavior in your classroom by having students choose. And in this day and age, we have oftentimes flexible seating or different environments than just a traditional classroom environment. And in my classroom, we have some gym balls for students to sit on. We have some couches. We have a mat where students can sit, and traditional desks, and even stand-up desks for students who want to stand while they read. Letting students choose where to sit. And then lastly, having students choose their rewards. We're going to talk about extrinsic rewards and incentives later on. So I'm just going to say having students involved in the rewards and choosing what they want will make them much more motivated to try to get them. Okay, I know I'm going super fast, so if you have any questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat so that I can answer them at the end of the session. And next, let's talk about the classroom environment. You really want to genuinely foster an environment where students actually want to be. If students don't want to be there, then they will not be motivated to read. And so one of the biggest issues is having an environment that is safe. So you always want to create a social and emotional safe haven for your students, especially students who might be minority students. In Korea, we often have simply one ethnicity in our classrooms, but we can also have other students mixed in. You want to make sure that students reading at different levels together in the same classroom, that they can feel safe. And this means not allowing any kind of language or derogatory marks against other students, and creating an environment where students work together and they encourage each other rather than just competing against each other for the top spots. Also, you want to make it as beautiful and aesthetically pleasing as possible. When students come into the classroom, they feel welcomed. They feel like, wow, this is a place where I could just hang out. I had created this English library. There's nothing here. You can see these pictures of my classroom. There was literally nothing here when I started this library at the beginning of this school year. So that was in February when I was making this library. I literally put this together for only about $100, 10만 won, so 100,000 won in Korean money. You can see there's a lot here. I had to get donations. I've made requests to tons of schools across Korea. I made requests to libraries in America who are willing to donate books for free to our students and even ship them to Korea. So I just want to encourage you, there's a lot you can do even if your school doesn't have financial resources. You can get creative, print things online, laminate them, Just do as much as you can, but the students can feel like they're welcomed in the classroom. And if students feel welcomed, here's a picture of my student coming to our library during their free time. Since I created this library, I cannot tell you the amount of times that I have students coming to my classroom in between classes, during lunchtime, during their free time, when they don't have clubs. And students will read. Like, of course, they will come, they want to hang out, they'll talk with me, they'll talk with their friends, they might even sleep on that couch. But oftentimes they will read. They simply think, oh, here's that book that I was reading last time. Maybe I'll just go through it and read. And some of them will even just see a book that'll grab their attention and they'll start reading and enjoy the environment. This is so encouraging as a teacher to see students reading when you're not actually requiring them to read. So I just want to encourage you to make your environment very comfortable. And then we're going to talk about breaking up the monotony of learning. And so there's a few ways you can do this. Of course, in the classroom, having a set schedule and routine for your students can be very helpful, but over time, doing the same thing week after week after week can get boring for students. So there's a few ways you can kind of shake it up to keep your students interested. One of those is by changing the seating. Like I said, I have flexible seating in my classroom, so students have a lot of choice to choose where they want to go. Maybe you want to encourage them to try a new place out or to do something else. You can also change location. Something I love to do during Korea's wonderful spring and fall months is have my students go outside. Just bringing them outside, I bring just a few blankets and then have students, just lay on the grass, sit on the blanket, and they can read their books. They absolutely love that. It is one of their favorite things. And it can be really encouraging in making the day more special rather than just same old, same old. You can also have students change what they're reading. So some students might always read mystery books. I have one student, she loves mystery books, and that's her thing. But every now and then she kind of can get a little bit bored. So when that happens, I might encourage her, hey, I've seen you read like 30 mystery books. Maybe, do you want to try reading this historical book? There's got some historical fiction in here. How about this? And then sometimes that can get students more interested. Also changing the length of the books. This is especially true for students who read super long books, novels. Sometimes they can feel discouraged, like it's taking me so long just to read one book. And then I can say to them, well, after you finish this book, how about we go to a shorter thing like a news article or a blog post or a comic book, something else to kind of just switch it up for them so that they feel like they're accomplishing more. And then there's a lot of really creative projects that you can do with your students. I'm going to talk about book recommendation posters. My students love these. If your students are artistic or creative in any way, having them make a poster about their favorite books and then having them introduce their favorite books to the class can be so encouraging. Not only does this have students look at these other posters and these other books that they wouldn't have heard of otherwise, but they might think, oh, hey, that's my level. Maybe I want to try to read that book. And then I will post these all over my classroom so students can then see, oh, hey, I don't know what to read today. Well, let me see, I'm the level 2A, there's 2A. Okay, maybe I'll try that book out. And they'll go ahead and have a book to read. You can also have students do some comic strip stories, have them retell the stories with comic strips, which they love. My students love doing that. You can also do some literary circles or have students read with partners or groups and help each other out. There's just a lot of projects that you can do. I have some more mentioned on the handout if you're interested. But all of this will lead to keeping your students interested and motivated. Here's another thing that I do. This is a book recommendation. This is our teachers' faces instead of our students, but my students will make these. They send a picture of their face, and then they just send 1 or 2 sentences about the book that they really liked reading. And it'll look like this. So students will come into the classroom and they can see what their friends are interested, what their friends are reading, and it also encourages them to just keep reading. Okay. Let's see, now we're going to talk about the want and the will. I need to speed it up a little bit because I want to save a lot of time for questions at the end. But some of the things you can do is explain the rationale, the reasoning behind why extensive reading programs are so important. You can also have students set their own individual goals, have teachers set goals if you see it as appropriate, have consistency and monitoring of students' progress. And then we're going to talk about intrinsic strategies as well as extrinsic motivation. There are so many reasons why extensive reading can be so important for students. And especially in our EFL context here in Korea, simply put, our students are not getting enough input to have significant language acquisition. So one of the things we really need to do is get our students to have a lot of input through reading and listening. And extensive reading can provide that for our students in a way that they wouldn't have otherwise. Of course, extensive reading has also shown gains in vocabulary and grammar, reading fluency. It also has shown improvements in writing. It develops a positive attitude towards reading in a second or foreign language, and it motivates the students to read more. All of this comes from Mikowaki's book, A Short Course in Teaching Reading. I also highly recommend this book if you are interested in more about extensive reading programs. So please explain this to your students regularly and consistently. If your students don't know why they're doing this reading, some of them are like, well, why am I reading? Am I learning? This isn't hard. I'm not learning a lot. They sometimes can feel like that, especially in Korea, where academic learning can often be perceived as studying for tests. Sometimes just reading a fun novel seems like it's not necessarily necessary. So if you explain the strategies and the reasoning behind what you're doing and why you have this program, students are much more likely to get on board. And actually, I have on our students reading logs. They each keep a little reading log with their name and the books that they've read. At the very top of the page, it says some things in Korean about why extensive reading is so necessary for the classroom. I highly recommend you do something like that so students can be reminded about why they're doing what they're doing. Okay, and then of course, individual goal setting. I first tried this with my students, and I'll be honest, it was a complete failure because I had students write too vague, unachievable, unmeasurable standards for success. Since then, I've learned that I can give my students very specific examples of goals that they can set, which I have written for you on the handout. You can have students measure in how many new words they learn. You can have them measure how many pages they read, how many books they read, if they improve their reading level. These are all different goals that students can set. So I want to encourage you to have students set their own goals. I also set a teacher set goal for my students. The reason being is that reading, since we give reading time to the students, we have reading as 20% of their English grade. So this would mean that I have a goal that each student has to meet in order to get 100% of their score for that semester. So I set the goal higher than they would normally set for themselves. And this is a very good challenge for students, especially those who are high achievers. Sometimes they think they're just doing enough, but then when you set the goal just a little bit higher, you will see them they will astound you. And then goals should be both reasonable and challenging. You never want to set a goal that's too high that students can achieve, and then they're thinking, wow, I'm not good, I'm not doing a good job because I couldn't achieve the goal that was set for me. You want to make sure that it's reasonable. And then I always recommend focusing on student effort rather than just like test scores or their performance on some kind of assessment like that. Just encourage the effort that they put forth rather than a simple reading level or a test score. And then make sure that you're looking at this regularly with students. I meet with my students one-on-one once a month, just have like a quick chat with each student, check in with them. And I recommend when you start your program or when you start your semester, you do this with students the second week to make sure and just see, how are you doing? Is it too hard? Is it too difficult? What do you think? Have you found books that you're interested in? This just starts a really good conversation. And it's one way to monitor students that you can get some good feedback and also think of some strategies to help your students. You can use book charts or journals or vocabulary notebooks, vocabulary flashcards, have them making these while they read. It's totally up to you. But make sure that you are doing some kind of progress keeping. Students I recommend you have students do this themselves, especially for older students who are perfectly capable of keeping track. It kind of limits the work that you have to do as a teacher, because Lord knows I do not have time to check 300 students' work on a weekly basis. And just be consistent and then regularly remind them of the value of AR and their expectations. I want to show you some visual representations that I use in my classroom. I have each class create their own poster like these. And you can see this is actually 1 month into our reading program, and look how much our students have read. The little stickers represent shorter books, and the bigger stickers recommend longer texts. So you can see overall, our students are reading quite a lot. And this is not at all what we had started with, but this visual representation, even for high schoolers, who would have thought high schoolers absolutely love getting a sticker and putting it right by their name? Because to me, I always thought that seems so childish. You know, elementary, middle school students will love that, but no, they love it. It gives them that sense of achievement and accomplishment, and they can visually see their success. So I highly recommend you use some kind of visual representation for students. Okay, yeah, we're totally running out of time, so I'm going to speed this up. I'm not going to read all of these, but this comes from Brown's textbook. And I just highly recommend, if you want to check to see if you're intrinsically motivating your students, that you can look and ask yourself these questions to see if the strategies that you're using are intrinsic or not. Of course, always use intrinsic motivation strategies before you use extrinsic. But extrinsic motivation strategies can also be super valuable. I'm sorry, I forgot. Also, you can make it more intrinsic by having learner-centered things and task-based activities, such as having an authentic purpose for reading what they're reading, such as creating a book review online or something like that. But here's some things from task-based activities that you can do with your students, such as quizzes, which I don't really recommend, book conferences, which I call book talks because it sounds more fun and much easier for students, peer conferences, book response forums, book presentations, reading circles, book charts, and book posters. I have my students do a little paper, or they can talk with me. I actually let them choose, because some students are way too shy to speak in English, while others would much rather write, and then some would much rather talk than write out on a little piece of paper. So you can choose kind of what purpose you do to assess your students and give them scores and see that they're actually reading the material that they say they're reading. So for incentives and rewards, since we're running out of time and everything is on the handout, I'm just going to highlight a few things. One, I highly recommend that you discourage competition. At first, I thought, I can motivate my students by getting some competition going, and this will definitely encourage your highly motivated students. You're going to get some of your top performers who will go above and beyond. However, for students who think, wow, well, I can never catch up to Jack, so why even try? You're going to have students with that kind of philosophy. So I recommend encouraging cooperation and collaboration. So I have my students work together to reach a goal for each semester. And if my students read over 2,000 books as a class during the school year, then they can choose their reward. So oftentimes my students will choose to eat chicken or pizza and watch an English movie. And for them, that's like the greatest thing in the entire world. And then you'll have students who are actually encouraging each other to reach that goal. So try to only use 1 or 2 of these, don't use too much. Then social factors. Since my students are underage, we're going to talk about the role of family, positive relationships with your students as a teacher, open communication, positive feedback, and group dynamics. So I send a paper home with my students to give to their parents at the beginning of the semester, and regularly give progress reports to the parents as well. And I have this all written out in Korean. So if you are interested in that, I can give it to you, although not everyone here is currently in Korea, so you might not be interested in that. But just make sure that you're explaining to them so that parents can support their kids as much as possible. Make sure that you listen to parents and hear their feedback. Parents can also model and read with their students. Next thing, we're going to talk about building positive relationships with your students. You want your students' perception to be positive of you. The simple fact is, if they don't like you, they're not going to like your class. Simple fact. So if you have a good relationship with your students, you know what they're interested in, you talk with them, and you have an open communication line with them, you really can do a lot, and you can learn a lot from your students. You know, education is not just teachers teaching, it's teachers and students working together. And so I just want to encourage you to really be, to develop mutual respect and understanding with your students. Here's a picture of me having fun with my students after they reached their reading goal. They got to eat some chicken and we watched the movie Elf, which they absolutely loved. And then let's talk about open communication. Make sure your students know and can expect how to be communicated with. Students don't know that you're going to be communicating with them or that you're going to be checking in with them regularly. Then suddenly they're like, oh, teacher, why are you asking? No, maybe I didn't do that. Then you can say, no, I'm going to check in with you every month to make sure you're doing this. I'm going to be putting your progress report on the board every month, every week so that you can see it. Then students will know, okay, so I need to be on top of this. There's so many different ways you can communicate with your students. I recommend that you find the way that's best for you. I like communicating in person and also doing some stuff over Kakao, which is a messaging app that's really popular in Korea. And then you can also do peer feedback, because teachers, we cannot do everything. Oh, sorry, but that was my last slide. We do peer feedback, but because we cannot do everything. So if you want students to read together and in groups, you can do that as well. Then we're going to talk about positive feedback. If students do the behaviors and are reading a lot, make sure that you're talking to them and giving them encouraging things. Just this past week, I saw a student who, when he first transferred to our school, he did not like reading, but he was reading. He read a whole book during the class time this past week. And I was so impressed that after class, I talked to him and I was like, hey, you did a fantastic job. I'm so proud of you. And then I wrote a little note to his parents and I sent it home. And that was really meaningful for him. So make sure that you're just positively commenting on students. That means you have to be monitoring and actually taking notice of your students' progress. So if you're not regularly looking in, you will not be able to give feedback on what you don't know about. And then you can give indirect feedback to students and direct feedback. Indirect feedback can be to parents, can even be to friends. Be like, oh, hey, Joy, can you tell Susan, even though she's not here today, can you tell Susan she did a fantastic job? And then Susan be like, oh, wow, teacher talks positive things about me, even when we're not together. And they're really, I've heard some positive things about that from my students. Group dynamics. Okay, group dynamics come from anthropology, sociology, psychology, but you want to make sure that you're fostering group norms and group cohesiveness, because this will affect the state and behavior of a group as a whole. So you want students working together. So I always make sure that my students are never saying anything negative about another student during the class time. I want to make sure that they're not making fun of students who are at a lower level. My students will read anywhere from kindergarten, native speaker kindergarten level, to native speaker 6th grade level. And so since that is a wide variety, I make sure that students are encouraging each other. We all celebrate each other's progress and not focus on just your level or test scores. Okay, I'm going to just finish this up real quick. So some things to remember. After getting students motivated, you need to continue their motivation. You can do this in a variety of ways by continually doing positive feedback, having that visual representation of their scores. Something I like to do is I like to introduce some extrinsic motivation during about 3/4 of the semester way in, when students are getting tired and they're just a little bit lazy. I like to give them a little reward that they can work towards that'll get them back into gear and excited about reading. And interestingly enough, participation in ER has shown to increase students' motivation. So if they actually are participating, then they will increase in motivation. I had a student who he wasn't participating in the program at all last year. I called him to my classroom after school and I said, hey, let's just read together. We read a couple of books together for the first time since he hadn't been doing anything. And guess what? That student went on to read 60 English books that semester. And he actually told me, teacher, I didn't know it was this easy and fun. I was like, well, yeah, you don't know until you try. Once you get students actually doing it, they can be much more motivated. And then all of these strategies, you can't possibly do all of them at once. You might want to just try one or two that you think might work for your context. Make sure that you're doing it well, and not just overloading them with strategies to do. You'll find out what works for you and what doesn't work for you. And then also make sure that you're keeping your strategies student-centered and making reading pleasurable. So let's see, I have the Easter egg. Where is it? There you go. Shawshank Redemption, Easter egg number 3. This is one of my favorite movies. And then, I'm sorry, I know that was really long. Let's see. Oops. Oh,
it was perfect timing, though. You wrapped up right at 12:45. Shannon, well done.
And then let me just put my title slide. Oops.
And that handout is amazing. I downloaded that, and that is like a very, very comprehensive resource.
Yeah, I wanted, like, because when I saw it online, I saw that there were 4 other sessions at the same time. So I was like, oh, maybe not everyone will be able to come to the session. And I guess I'm a little bit of an overachiever, perfectionist. So I put together that handout so that people could see even if they couldn't come to this session.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you did, because I think there are a lot of people who didn't make it who will really get a lot out of this when they come back to it. The handout and the presentation also. Yeah. Can go ahead.
If we have a little time, does anyone have any questions or have anything that they've tried in their classroom that they've seen work?
Okay, I'm wondering how you run your book conferences. Let's say I read a book and you want to see whether I really read it and understood it. What kind of questions would you ask me?
Yeah, actually, I could send you the exact thing that I have that I look at when I talk to students. But really, I kind of use Bloom's taxonomy of critical thinking questions. And depending on the level of the student, we'll choose what kind of question I talk about. It might be simply like, hey, just summarize what was the book about. Or it might be something like, if you were the main character, what would you have done? Or what do you think would happen next? And I just ask these kinds of questions. I try not to make it too long or too difficult. But really, the whole purpose is to make it a fairly easy form of assessment. So it seems like fun. We're just talking about what you've read. So I could make it much more difficult for students and really quiz them on the book, but this is not my style because I don't want it to be an intimidating thing for them, especially speaking in a foreign language, their native teacher. It should really be non-threatening. So I try to make it a little bit fun and a little bit interesting, but also get some students thinking a little bit about it, or summarizing or reflecting on what they've read.
Yeah. Is your school an English medium school or a Korean medium school?
No, so our school, it's how do you say this in English? We're not a public school, but we are certified by the Korean government as an alternative school because we're a Christian school. Yeah, it's not English medium. So some of our students actually had no prior English education before coming. So I really have like a wide variety. I had a student who didn't know the alphabet when he came in 6th grade, and I was shocked. And then I have students who are reading Harry Potter and Twilight and these books for native speakers. So yeah, not English medium.
I have a question, but I want to offer Jared a chance first because it's very late at night there. Do you have any questions or comments before
yeah, I was wondering. Yeah, I was wondering about like how you integrate like journals or certain records that students make of their own extensive reading. Like, how do they actually record what they've done? Do you give them guidelines for what they need to do to like talk about it? Because obviously it's important to write about what you read. I think it's important to make a record of that because it's not just like a sticker that shows that you've read it. You really have to kind of for yourself. And I mean, especially for me, if I'm reading something, I feel like I like to annotate things. I like to do a lot of things like that. But in terms of just like writing something about what they read, what kinds of things do you do?
Yeah, so I have a reading log that all of my students do. And I provide this for the students. So I give them a piece of paper for those who are reading paper books. And then I also provide a Google Sheet that I share with students at the beginning of the semester. And in that reading log, they'll write the title of the book, the number of minutes it took to read, the level, what am I forgetting? Number of pages, etc. And then there's two other sections there that I have. One is for new vocabulary words, and then the other is for comments about the book. So comments are totally optional. I do not require students to write comments. So some students, they don't write anything, but then some students, they actually will write about something about the book in their comment section. It kind of just varies per person. And then for the way I give them an assessment, I do two things: the book talks, which are book conferences with me verbally. And then I also have a form, a piece of paper that students could write. And in that form, students can write a summary, and then they also can choose one reflection question that they can write about. And really, I think it's just a preference thing for my students. I have some students who hate writing. They hate it with every fiber of their being. Then I have some students who hate talking with every fiber of their being, which is why I have created this two-way street for students. Of course, I don't let students actually write in the physical book because they are shared for everyone, which is why I have the reading log for students to use.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm curious what kind of response you get from parents. Do you ever have parents who, particularly for the students who are lower level or intermediate level, do you ever have parents who want them to read higher level things and don't understand the whole point of extensive reading?
Yes, all the time. So, which is why I send that thing home in Korean to the parents that says explicitly why we're doing what we're doing, what are the benefits. Because I have parents, especially for our high school students, some of our high school students want to study abroad or they want to go to a good university. And the parents like, why is my student reading Harry Potter? This is not beneficial. My student should be reading 모의고사 and swimming questions or the national testing things. Why are they doing this in your class? And I will tell them, this is exactly why we're doing this. This is what the research shows. And then that oftentimes will make parents get on board with what you're doing. And I have definitely had parents who've said, well, okay, this book is too easy. My student needs to be reading something higher level. And then I'll sit down and I'll be like, well, actually, I've known your student for this long now, and I've seen them. This level is too hard. They get discouraged and they stop reading. This level is appropriate. It'll have them learn new vocabulary while they can still understand. And my Korean is really good. So when I talk with parents, I talk 100% in Korean.
Oh, bless you. Wonderful.
I can actually explain these things to them in a way that they can get on board and be like, oh, okay, I understand that. And I tell them our goal is to get your student up to a higher level over time. And that oftentimes they'll accept that.
Okay, great, great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. This was, for me, very interesting and very useful. And I think a lot of people, let me stop the recording here.